This first statement, I'm not a language guy. I think this sort of speaks for itself, right? There are some people who are good at cooking, some people who are great at running, whatever. There are some people who are good at languages. Not everyone's good at everything. What's wrong with this? I'm not a language guy. That makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, I guess, if you think of languages as this hobby that, people like me do to learn lots and lots of languages. I guess not everybody wants to do that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But languages are something which is so human, and something which is such a big part of the world and a part of life. All of us learn language. All of us learn at least one language from where we're from. But the interesting thing is that there's so many societies and so many countries in the world where learning one language isn't enough. There's so many examples, if we think of, for example, India, South Africa, parts of Australia, where basically you have to speak more than one language in order to survive. Now, if there was only, say, 10% of the population that could learn another language, those societies wouldn't exist. Those societies wouldn't function because everybody has to speak more than one language. So really, it's not that you're not a language guy, it's just possibly you haven't had the opportunity to learn, and you haven't had the opportunity to learn in the way that suits you. And that's really what I'm here to also talk to you guys about, which is how can you learn best, how can you find the motivation, and how can you become a language guy.
You don't start life as a language person. Maybe you spend your whole life just speaking one language. You get a lot of people who only speak one language. Even if they speak multiple languages, like my parents speak like 4 or 5 languages because in India, as you said, there's a bunch of languages over there. But my dad would say, I'm a marketer. My mom would say, I'm a teacher. But they wouldn't call themselves linguists or language people. What's wrong with the statement? I don't get it.
Well, do you need to be a language guy to speak multiple languages? I don't think so, I mean, you don't need to have a huge interest in linguistics. You don't need to have an academic understanding of grammar. You just have to have 3 things to become someone who speaks multiple languages. You need to have the motivation, or as we call it, the need to learn another language. Mm-hmm. Then you need to have the resources. You need to have textbooks, access to a teacher maybe, someone you can practice with. And then you just need time. Motivation, resources, and time. And when I meet people who say, oh, I've never learned a language, and then I talk to them about it, normally I find out one of those 3 things, or 2 of those 3 things, or all 3 has been missing. And that's why they've never done it. So if you want to do it, but even better, if you need to do it, you have a way to do it, and you have time to do it, you will learn languages, because we all learn languages at the various different parts of our life.
I don't know, it's something that I feel like you need an aptitude for. Like, I think that you're talking about teachers and textbooks and things like that, but I think that's excluding a lot of people, because you have people with learning difficulties, people who, for whom traditional schooling doesn't work, and they're just missing the ability to learn languages, and saying that a statement like this is nonsense excludes them, and I think that it just sort of punishes them for not really being at the kind of level that you are.
Well, I'm not trying to exclude or punish anyone, but I think what I'm trying to say is, basically, anyone can learn a language if they want to, and they really want to, and they find a way to do it. And often people haven't had that opportunity. Maybe they haven't made that opportunity for themselves. And really the key, I mean, we all encounter language learning at school. And we encounter language learning when we learn grammar, we learn the 3rd conditional, we learn all these vocabulary lists to pass tests. But for me, that's not language learning. For me, I studied languages at school for all of those years, but it doesn't compare at all with the way that I've studied languages as an adult and the way that I've been able to do it. Because once I became in control of my own learning, I could learn in the way that works best for me. And I think when I hear people who say, I'm not a language guy, maybe they haven't gone on that journey yet. Maybe they haven't discovered the best way that they can learn. I also teach languages, and I've had many students over the years who are dyslexic, many students who have hearing difficulties and things like that. It's not that these people can't learn another language. Learning another language is a completely normal phenomenon in human history. We've always done it. We've always learned other languages. It's just in the last 100 years or so where we live in countries and societies that tend to speak one language, at least in Europe, it's become less normal, but we can do it. So the key is not to say, I am a language guy, I'm not a language guy. It's just to say, I, as an individual, I, as a completely different person, can learn a language in this way that I have found. And if you haven't found that yet, you've got a really exciting adventure ahead of you, because now you can start looking.
You're a native English guy, right? What was the first non-English language that you learned?
I grew up with two languages at home. English is my native language, and I grew up in the UK, but my mother is Greek, so I grew up also with Greek at home. Well, I say this, but actually, when I was a child, my mother would speak Greek to me, and I would always reply in English, always. I never wanted to speak Greek. And she got very desperate, she got very upset. She said, when are you going to learn to speak this language? So she decided to take me to Greece one summer when I was 6 years old, and I did not see a single person there who spoke English, my language, and suddenly I needed to speak languages because I needed to communicate. And by the end of that summer, I was speaking. And that summer, I got addicted to languages because I understood that languages are not something we do at school to pass a test. They're not something you do to please your mother. Languages are this amazing tool to connect with the people in the world, to speak to people that otherwise you could never speak to go to places you otherwise could never go to. And once you have that bug, once you understand the power of speaking another language, you will never stop, because there are so many languages in the world, so many cultures to explore, so many people to meet, and I hope you get as addicted as I am.
All right, fine. Despite my best efforts, I've been convinced. Okay, so I guess we're ready to burn this myth, right? All right, so 3, 2, 1. All right, so this myth is burned. Congratulations, Alex. That was one step over here. Let's have a look at number 2. All right, Google Translate will do it. I can't tell you how often I use Google Translate on a day-to-day basis, okay? Hungarian is desperately difficult to learn. Duolingo doesn't necessarily get me all the way over there. Okay, so Google Translate will do it. I speak to so many people using words that I learned from here, using phrases. I can use the camera function to translate billboards, whatever it is. I mean, it's super helpful. Google Translate does do it. So I think we're done here, right? We can just go home.
Well, Google Translate can do some things. I think it's a much better way to put it like that. And I, as a language learner, I use Google Translate very often when I'm learning for very specific tasks. If I'm writing something, I'll use Google Translate to check I haven't made spelling mistakes, to make sure things are correct. But Google Translate cannot do it. Google Translate, at the moment, is an AI technological device that you can use to translate things automatically. Now, what's it like if you go to a supermarket in Hungary and you have a question and you type it in Google Translate and you hand it over to the person sitting there and she takes it, she puts her glasses on, she reads it, and then she goes, okay, reply, and then she hands the phone back, and then you take that and I mean, this is not communication.
You're describing all of my experiences in any doctor's office, by the way.
But this is not communication at all. And language is such a human thing. Language is about one human talking to another human as a human. And for that communication to take place, technology can't always get in the way. And this comes to an important point.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off over there, but Google Translate has a microphone function, right? I can talk into it, and then it translates with this beautiful robotic voice. And then, Ergi Neni at my doctor's office will say something back, and then I get it in English. That is, that is communication, but with a middleman. But it helps.
Well, communication it could be, but I think there's two ways that we can use languages, and this is a very important distinction. We can use languages for transactions. We can use languages to buy things, to do things like that. Or we can use language for interaction, for getting to know people, for speaking, for communicating. Now, if you want to just buy something in a shop, maybe Google Translate can do it.
All right, cool.
If you want to meet the love of your life and speak to them and get to know their family and start a new life for yourself, move to another country, feel at home, Google Translate is not going to be there in your marriage, I guarantee it.
Well, that is how I speak to my girlfriend's mother. And she's doing the same thing for me. I don't know, we sort of have this sort of fun relationship, where we laugh at, the mistakes that it might make sometimes or whatever. And that, I think, it deepens our bond in a way, because what we recognize in each other is that, Sid is making an effort, Gyöngy is making an effort with me. And that is what brings us closer together. It's not the immediacy of the communication, it's the fact that we're attempting to communicate at all. And I think that that's like it's a sort of more core, primal connection that we're making.
Sure. I mean, like I said, Google Translate, I think, can do some things. I'm not saying it's a useless tool. But for me to have a communication, a conversation with someone through a computer, it's a non-starter. And I mean, also, language learning is not just about, I need to say this thing to this person. There's also a real beauty that comes from being able to, for example, sit on the metro and listen to conversations around you and understand what people are saying about you, about other people.
I'd rather not know, to be honest.
Now, I don't know if you have Google Translate open all the time on the MKETU, like, in case anyone is talking about you, but Google Translate cannot do that. That's something that only you can do if you speak the language and you speak it well.
Do you think that at a certain point that Google Translate will be able to read facial cues? So it can sort of tell you the emotion behind the statement if you're videoing someone?
Well, this is the big question. I mean, how much is technology going to replace humans? I mean, in my personal opinion, I think technology has done a really good job of replacing humans when in the past, humans have had to behave like robots. Technology does a really good job now of taking over the boring, mundane stuff that a computer can do.
Yeah.
But I can't really see how certain human traits, certain human behaviors could ever become computerized. I mean, a really good example of where Google Translate fails is with the word sorry in English. There's hundreds of different ways that the word sorry can be used. You could say, oh, sorry, we get it, right? I'm sorry. But also, sorry, which means, you know, someone bumps into you. Google Translate can't pick up on these things at the moment, and it's going to be such a huge technological leap to get there. And do we even want it to get there? Because really, if we let Google Translate doing that, we're asking Google Translate to become more human than us and to do something so human, which is to learn another language.
Actually, that's true, because I don't know if you guys knew this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the word in English with the most definitions is the word set. It has 43 definitions. And if you just put set into Google Translate, you might not get what you're looking for. Is that right?
Yes, and there's plenty of other examples where words have multiple translations. I mean, one of the problems we have with an automatic translate service is that one language does not equal another language, and you will know that as people who speak Hungarian and speak English. Many times, you can't directly translate a word for another word. You have to understand the meaning, and then you have to think, how can I express this in another language? An automated translation service, which basically tries to turn languages and translation into a mathematical equation, in my opinion, is fundamentally flawed because it skips that human touch.
All right, Alex, let's do this. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, well, that's 2 for 3. Let's call that luck. All right, we'll see how he does with the third one. All right, audience, this myth is burned. Okay, now, number 3. This one you're going to have a very difficult time defending. All right? Because small languages are useless. Okay, audience, raise your hand if you speak Tuvalu. Really? None of you? Why not? You don't need it for your job, right? It's useless. Alex.
Well, I've spent my life learning small languages that people have told me are useless, and I've always found ways to use them. So on an anecdotal level, I found a lot of use for these small languages. I started learning Dutch aged 14. Everyone said, completely useless. They all speak English. Dutch has been a really important language for me. Hungarian has been a wonderful language to learn. Everyone said, oh, there's no point in learning Hungarian whatsoever. It's completely unrelated.
Honestly, why did you bother learning Hungarian?
Hungarian's the challenge.
It's your Everest, right? It's your János.
Hungarian is my Everest. And I don't know, I came to Hungary. I was very interested in what was happening here. And because I didn't speak the language, I couldn't access anything. I was dependent on someone to tell me what was happening, to speak to people for me, to read things to me in a restaurant. And I felt like such an alien. I hated it. I just wanted to feel like a human being. And the only way I could feel like a human while living in Budapest was to start learning Hungarian, to be able to speak to people myself. My proudest achievement ever after 3 months is when a package came to my house. I missed it. I had to go to the Magyar Posta where they didn't speak any English. And after half an hour, I got the package. That was such a good achievement.
Half an hour in Magyar Posta, that's congratulations.
In very basic Hungarian. It was all like that. But I got that. Without that, I couldn't have done it. This is the thing, right? When we go to another country and we speak that language, we can speak to anyone in the street. We can understand anything that's written down. We are free. When we go to another country and we're dependent on someone to explain these things to us, to tell us what's happening, to translate, we're not free. We feel so hemmed in.
I beg to differ, because if I ask someone on the street to help me translate something, that's a connection I'm making with them. And I can't tell you how happy a lot of Hungarians are to help me, because they've learned English and they're kind of proud of their English ability, which they don't necessarily get to use on a day-to-day basis. And they're like, oh, hey, I get to speak English right now. Great, I'm gonna go the extra mile with this guy.
Absolutely.
And so while that doesn't help me on a direct basis with the person that I want to deal with, I've made something sort of significant on the side over here.
But to your point, the number of times that I'll speak Hungarian to a Hungarian person and explain that I am not Hungarian and I don't live here, but I'm interested in the language and I want to learn, I think that connection is 10 times more, because people are often so happy to understand that people are taking an interest, you know. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's great to make connections, and we can do that by asking people to help out, but I think the strongest connection is showing someone, I'm interested in your culture, I'm interested in your language, and I'm here to learn from you.
Yeah, but okay, so learning Hungarian is useful in Hungary. You mentioned Dutch earlier. That's useful in the Netherlands, it's useful in Belgium, it's useful in South Africa, and wherever else, you know, I guess some regions in Pennsylvania where the Amish are. But that's more useful than learning Hungarian. By the way, I'm not disparaging learning Hungarian. I think you should go for it. But ultimately, you're doing it for yourself. It doesn't really have any utility.
Well, I'd also point out that learning Hungarian is extremely useful in London, where I grew up in a building with 2 Hungarian families and would often hear people talking Hungarian, and starting to understand what they were saying was like being able to see light for the first time. So that was very, very useful. Well, what do we mean by use? I mean, how are we're saying that small languages are useless. How do we define that it's useless? How do we define, conversely, that large languages are useful? What is the use of a language?
Okay, I'll give you an example, right? You go in for a job interview. You have your CV over there, language skills, you know, English, German, Russian, Catalan, all the other what other languages do you speak, by the way?
English, Greek, German, Russian, Spanish, French, Dutch, Afrikaans, Hebrew, Italian, Hungarian, Serbian. This always happens. I always miss a couple. Like,
oh yeah, it happens to me all the time. Yeah.
Yiddish. There's 2 that are missing, which I'll remember in about 5 minutes.
All right, well, I'll speak some Yiddish to you right now. You're a real mensch.
Schönen Dank.
A lot of them are just for you to enrich your own life, right?
Enrich, I wouldn't say. Enable is the word I would say. These languages have enabled me to go to these countries and to feel at home. They've enabled me to meet friends who are a really important part of my life even now. They've made me who I am.
Yeah, but the point is, if you go in for a job interview and you write Yiddish on your CV, no employer is going to be like, oh, that's going to come in handy, unless if you're looking for a job at a synagogue.
Well, maybe you're applying for the wrong jobs. I mean, when I see someone with a CV which has weird languages on it, like Yiddish, like Hungarian or something, I think this is a really interesting person that I have to speak to, because I'm sure there's a story. And there always is. There's always a reason why someone has done that, you know. But for me, why are small languages useful? I mean, what is a language, basically? A language is the way that a group of people has agreed to communicate, the way that a cultural group has decided to see the world, talk about it. And often it's very difficult to understand that cultural perspective without the language. If you don't speak the language, you can't understand what's happening in that culture. And if we say a language is useless, are we also saying a culture is useless? Are we also saying there are countries where we don't care about what they think, about what they worry about what they see? Because I believe that the most beautiful thing about this world is diversity. And the fact that we have so much human diversity and natural diversity in this world. And for me, language really is the thing which shows us that that diversity exists. I love the feeling of not being able to understand what someone else is saying in another language, because it reminds me that the world is complicated. It reminds me that the world is a very big place. And as long as I live, I will never know everything about it. And so for me, small languages are so useful because they show us that. They show us that no matter what we think, people out there maybe have a different perspective to us, different experience, and that's why we must always treat people with respect and open-mindedness.
Listen, Alex, that's a really nice thought, and, you know, kumbaya and all of that. But ultimately, if you're talking about a small language, it doesn't have any impact on the price of onions. You know, it's like you don't spend your whole your every moment, thinking about the impact on literally every culture in the world. You know, when you bought your coffee and croissant this morning, you weren't like, oh, I wonder how the people in Papua New Guinea feel about this. That's just not how people live our lives. That's not useful.
Well, I'd respectfully argue that there is more to the world than the price of onions. And that's an important thing. We need to buy onions, sure, but you know, we also need to understand the complexity of the world. The world is complex. And actually, if small languages weren't there, if everybody spoke the same language, it would be much easier to forget that. It would be much easier to forget that the world is difficult, the world is complex, and the world is beautiful in its diversity. And as I say, for me, small languages are useful because they remind us of that.
Do you know what the smallest language in the world is, like the language with the fewest number of speakers?
Well, I knew, for example, in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, many people don't know this about the UK because we tend to speak English, but actually the UK has several languages that are spoken in it. It has a lot of linguistic diversity. And one of those languages...
What's another example?
Sorry?
What's another example apart from English?
Well, not English. I'm going to talk about a language called Cornish, which is spoken in the southwest of England. Now, this is an endangered language, which means it's a language which is going to die very soon, which means very soon nobody will speak that language, nobody will understand it, everything that's ever been said or written in that language will be lost forever.
All right, question. Raise your hand if you've heard of Cornish before.
And after this, look how many more people will raise their hands.
I don't think it would be a disaster if Cornish became extinct, because like 7 people raised their hands.
Well, it would be a disaster for the Cornish people if the language disappears.
Yeah, okay.
And as a human being, as a citizen of the world, as a citizen of Europe, I care about people. And I care about people's culture and people's language. And I think they have a right to try and keep that language alive. And, you know, we care about things like pandas. We care about things like animals that are endangered. We give money to try and keep animals alive because we can see pandas. We see that they're beautiful and we want them in the world. We can't always see language. We can't always see human diversity in the way that we see animal diversity. But human diversity, linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, they're so important. They make us what we are. They're one of the most beautiful parts of the world. And if you care about pandas dying out, you should also care about languages like Cornish dying out and the Aboriginal languages of Australia. Because without those languages, our world is going to be a much poorer place.
All right, fair enough. All right, thank you. 3, 2, 1. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have egg on my face because I've been utterly humiliated at the first session at Brain Bar 2021. But anyway, I concede. This myth is burned. Alex, congratulations. Give it up for Alex Rawlings, everyone. Alex. Thanks, man.